So you've got your developer environment set up, but how do you actually write the code in it? That's what we're getting into starting in this video. And if you haven't already done your developer environment setup and done the practice exercises in the previous video, please do that first. So if I were to describe coding, programming, whatever you want to call it, scripting, as simply as I can think to explain it, and this is going to be very abstract at first, this is how I would explain it. And that is there are two main parts to coding. There are making sure that the program remembers things or stores certain values, and I'll give examples of that in just a moment. And there's also creating logical actions on those stored values. We talked about in one of the previous videos how, when we write algorithms in our code, that it is a series of inputs, doing something to it, and then outputs. Well, the things that you store in code can be more than what someone has inputted into a program, but that is an example of one of those stored values that we're talking about. I want you to completely forget the logical action portions of programming because we're going to talk about that in the next video. This video, we're going to focus on the first part, which is things that the program needs to remember or store. I'm using the word store flexibly here. So what do you need to know about this stored data in a program before we actually just go ahead and do it in code with some network engineering examples? What I would say about these things that are stored in code is that they are called variables. It's not important that you remember that at this point, but they're called variables, and variables have a name that you refer to them as. They have a stored value, and they have a type of value. And I'm not gonna say any more. Let's just get into the IDE or to our developer environment and look at some examples. All right, so here we are in our developer environment that we set up in the last video. I have opened it up and this is what it looks like before I've started a project or a new file. And keep in mind that this developer environment could support a number of different languages. So when you hit new file, right now I've only got Python installed, and it also gives you the option off the bat to do a text file. But if I was programming in other languages, those would also show up here. So I'm going to choose Python file. So that's what we're looking at right now, is just having that file open in the editor. Right now you can see it's untitled. We'll have to name that later, but we won't worry about that right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap my fingers. And when I do, you're going to see, I think, 5 different data types that we're going to cover from a network engineering perspective, and we're going to talk about it. Ready? So now you see some information in our Python file, and you'll notice that there's a lot of different squiggly lines in it, and that is because right now we are just writing English language, and it's not something that the interpreter understands. Just like in human languages, if you don't use the correct grammar or syntax, people may not really be able to understand you. It's the same thing in a coding language. A coding language has grammar or syntax. But anywho, these are all different types of data that we can talk about in networking. And obviously when you're solving your own problems from your own expertise and vantage point, they're probably going to be more interesting and complex. But you're working with your developer friend here. So first we have an IP address. That's our first value we're working with. Second is the name of a firewall, Firewall West. The third is the fact that you have 50 domains that have been visited by host in your network. Number 4 is that some device in your network has 27.56 days of uptime. And finally, whether or not a firewall is active or not. Can you tell that I used to work with firewalls? So these are all examples of things in networking, types of data that you might want to remember and work with in your program or in your code that you're writing. So let's name each one of these variables so that you can see how someone might go about doing that and what the syntax looks like. And let's also talk about what data type each of these things would be, because that's the more important part. I mean, you can Google the syntax or use AI. You don't need to know what this pound sign is. It's just a comment, which means, again, that this code will not be read by the interpreter. And I'm going to go ahead and comment all of that out because when I run this little baby code, I don't want it to throw up errors. So anyway, I'm actually not going to start with the very first value just because I want to make some points before we get to that one. So let's skip the IP address for now. Let's start with a objectively easier one, which is Firewall West, the name of a firewall. First, what we want to do is name this variable, and we can get better at naming our variables later, but for now, let's just name it firewall name. So in Python, right, you can't put spaces in your variables. You typically put an underscore between everything, and it's all lowercase. You can do other things, you can have it weird capitalizations and it'd be fine, just no spaces allowed in that name. Then we're gonna put the equal sign because we're going to say, hey, this variable refers to this value. And again, we have the name of a firewall. And when we're dealing with text in our code, that is a type that is called string. And strings have to be written in quotes. So a string is any form of text that basically isn't a number. It isn't a number and it's not a true or false statement, which we'll talk about later. There's obviously nuance to all of this. I'm just giving you something to run with from the start. So firewall west is a string because it's text. It's written text that is not math. And when we have a string value, we put it between quotes. We could also put it between single quotes. That would work just fine. Just as valid. All right, so we have done our firewall west here, so I'm going to erase that so we remembered we did it. Next, let's do the 50 domains visited by hosts in your network. So let's name that variable. This one might be a little bit trickier. We could just name it as something as simple as domains for now, but in a real program, you'd probably want to be a little more descriptive there. So domains, we put our equal sign so that we know what value we're about to store or refer to with this variable. Here we are dealing with a number that has no decimals in it. It's just an integer value, which means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not 5.78. That is called an int, short for integer. So hopefully that's easy to remember. And what's great about ints is that we just write the number there, boom. That is valid Python. And again, we're not doing anything with these values because we haven't gotten to that portion of our learning yet, but you know how to store them in your code now. So let's do the 27.56 days of uptime next. For this one, let's name the variable days uptime. Can be anything you want. We're putting our equal sign, like we said. This is also a number, but remember, it can't be an int because an int is an integer. It is a number that does not have a decimal, and this is a decimal, so it is a data type that is called a float. It is also written just as is, so it might be like, oh, what does it matter if it's an int or a float? Basically, it's gonna matter later on if you want to do any math. For instance, if you wanted to add two numbers, but that's for later. Now, firewall active. In this case, this is a variable that can only be true or false. It's either active or passive, or active or not active. That's one way you can think about it in logical coding thinking. We'll put the variable name as firewall active. So firewall active. So if you're not familiar, a firewall can be in active mode or in passive mode. So in this type of data, there are only two options here, right? You could just use a string value, but what's going to be a lot more useful in your code is, as a network engineer, you probably want to know, is it active or not? Like yes or no, because that's going to impact how I do things or troubleshoot or my configurations. We're just going to make this a true or false statement. When you are dealing with a true or false statement, that data type is called a Boolean, or in some languages it's called a bool. It's the same thing. I just get confused between different languages. And in this case, it's either capital T true or capital F false. So you cannot do a lowercase true. That is not valid Python. So we'll just say capital T true in this case. That's it. And remember, this is text. It is a word. But because it's a true or false statement, it does not go in those quotes. All right, on to our last value. And again, if this is all sounding sort of like gibberish, as I will say in most of these videos, you're just getting exposed to the information, and you learning is going to come with practice. And I'm going to make sure that we're practicing previous concepts in next videos, but it's also up to you to make sure you're practicing. All right, but enough lecturing. This last value, why did I leave the IP address for last? Well, I want to ask you, dear viewer, what data type do you think this IP address is? Is it a string, which is text? Is it an int, which is an integer? Is it a float, which is a number with decimals? Or is it a true false statement, which is a bool or boolean? Okay, so it doesn't really matter if you get this wrong. It's just to make you think. But we're gonna go ahead and name this. Let's just name it IP address to keep it simple. Again, in your code, it would be more specific. I'm gonna let you in on a secret, and this is something that not a lot of people have to deal with because not everybody is doing network automation, but an IP address is not technically a float, which might be the answer that you were thinking of because it has decimals in it. It is not a float because Python only recognizes a float as something that has one decimal point, as in like 11.4, not 11.4.4. You know, we actually need to treat IP addresses like text or strings. So in this case, we're going to put it between our quotes. It could be single quotes or double. Beautiful. So now we have those values. So now we have created all of these variables, which are all these things that we're storing in memory for these values. And we've also know what data type these things are, right? Which is great. All right, just for giggles, I'm going to do one practice exercise live with you. What if I want to know that an upgrade was completed on a device, that it was successful or not? There are different ways that you might put this in your code, right? You might put the version of that software in your code. You might say complete, upgrade complete might be something you want to know. So take a moment to pause this video and think about what you would name these two variables. What would you name, version 5.6 of an upgrade or software that you're using on a device? And what would you name whether or not an upgrade completed? All right, hopefully you paused and answered. Okay, did you come up with your answers? Now, what data types are both of these values? What data type is version 5.6 or the number 5.6? And what data type would the upgrade being complete or not be? Pause. All right, I hope you paused. I'm gonna give you some things to think about, a semi-answer. It is an answer, but there's many answers. First of all, the version 5.6, right? This variable could just be version. It could be named current version. It could be named upgraded version. It could be NXOS version. You get the picture. I don't know the versions of my NXOS devices. I did not really work with that device. And then this would be a float data type because it does have a decimal and just one decimal, not the weird IP address thing. So you can just write that in there. Beautiful. Now, what about the upgrade being complete? Again, this is sort of a yes-no situation, right? It's either complete or it failed somehow. It's not complete. We would consider that a true or false statement. And for the variable name, I would probably name this something like upgrade complete. True or false? We'll say false this time. I can't think of what else I would name this personally. This is just how my brain thinks, but you could name it other things. That makes sense. All right, we have done our variables video. We've learned how to create those in code. We've been exposed to them. Obviously, it's going to take more practice to get really comfortable with it, and I did not cover everything in this video. This is just exposure therapy crash course. If you have any questions, as always, please let me know in the comments. And as always, please complete your practice exercises, which I'm linking down in the description. And just as like a little bonus exercise, if you feel like it, put in the comments some network engineering value that you feel like you might want to store in code, and let all of us in the comments try to guess what type of data that is. Our next video is going to talk about the logical actions part of programming or coding, which is going to make things a little more interesting. It's going to feel a little more like coding, and I can't wait to dive in with you. Take care.